What is going on, YouTube? It is your boy, Faithful to God. And this is another early morning discussion. I am joined by my dear friend Abu. Abu, say hello to the audience.
Good morning and happy Saturday.
If we could we give people a brief overlay of what we're going to be discussing today?
Yeah, sure. The way I would describe it is we're going to have just a lighthearted and fun discussion on some of the, I guess we could say, the lower hanging fruit within the the branches of discussions, speculative discussions on Israelite DNA. So we're going to look a little bit at Ron Dalton, a clip from his infamous documentary, and maybe we'll look a little bit at Kelly Richardson towards the end. I know you wanted to cover the Teo twins, and also first time for me looking into some of the statements by Divine Prospect. So this is interesting for me because I know Divine Prospect has a fairly popular and respected channel, but I myself have not really looked too closely at his channel. I'm not very familiar with him, and I don't mean that in any sort of disrespectful way. It's just because my viewing experience is very limited, and he seems like a gentleman to me. So it'll be an interesting. It's interesting for me to take the first look at his stuff because I haven't looked at any of his stuff until just recently. So it's an interesting discussion.
Absolutely, yeah. To pretty much examine what I consider to be confusing Hebrew Israelite DNA methodologies. So I think that there are certain Hebrew Israelites out there who attempt to make recourse to DNA. Of course, not all of them do. I think most of the Hebrew Israelite community would be adverse to the idea of DNA and things of that nature. And yet you do have some of the what are considered the savvier proponents within the movement who do want to make appeals to DNA. And it seems that because this is such a new topic for many of them, a lot of them are making really basic mistakes in terms of just approach, in terms of understanding how DNA works. More specifically, for those who make appeals to the Y chromosome, the Y DNA, the paternal DNA.
Which is relevant to paternal definitions of Israelite and or patrilineal definitions. One thing I'll say, there's no shame in being misinformed on the topic as long as you present it some relatively honest with a level of intellectual honesty and stuff like that. It's when arrogance comes in, like we're going to be looking at the Teo twins. I mean, it's they've spent years telling people that that other people don't know DNA. They say that all the time. Like, oh, unlike you, I've read the scientific papers and stuff like that, and so it takes on a bit of a different feel when we look into what they'll be saying. And but if as for others, if others make mistakes, ultimately there's no shame in that. It's a learning process for all of us.
Absolutely. So if we could, let's actually kick things off by since we mentioned Divine Prospect, let's actually begin there if possible.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to begin with. Like I said, I don't know a lot about him. He's I've been aware of him for years, but I've never really taken a close look at him. But seems like a gentleman. So while we'll be raising some questions about some things he said, no disrespect intended here. I think this will be a fun discussion.
Absolutely.
If you want, I can.
Yeah, if you could, just for the audience, so they can,
give an opening. So as I understand it, within the Israelite spectrum, first to give people some background, there are multiple definitions of Israelite floating around the Israelite spectrum, right? Different people have different definitions of Israelite, but by far the majority hold to a paternal or patrilineal definition of Israelite, where an Israelite is one who descends paternally on their strict paternal line from Jacob. If your father's 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 father, your paternal line goes all the way back to Jacob, then you're an Israelite, period, end of sentence. That's what most Israelites hold to, and that's why the Israelite spectrum has become interested in Y DNA and the DNA of the, that focuses on the Y chromosome, which captures the paternal haplogroup, which captures your strict paternal line as your Y chromosome. Your paternal haplogroup does not change when you, irrespective of what sort of women your paternal line has interacted with, and it allows you to trace the paternal line, therefore. And so there has been discussion among the paternal lines of various prominent Israelites. As you know, there was a bit of a, I guess, controversy over the paternal line of, for example, the leader of Sakari. And I'm not throwing any shade at him. I have the same haplogroup as him. So, but there's a lot of interest in the haplogroups of different figures.
And for the record, he's haplogroup R, just so people know.
And as am I. So there's been discussion about this, about a number of prominent Israelites and what's their haplogroup. So getting back to Divine Prospect, for a while now, there's been some discussion on what his haplogroup might be, because another thing to keep in mind is the majority of the West African diaspora in excuse me, in the Americas has E1B1A. But there are others within that spectrum who have other haplogroups, and so it's often a point of interest when someone, especially a prominent figure within the Israelite spectrum, has another haplogroup. And there has been some discussion for a while now about Ron Shields' haplogroup. There have been multiple people out there who were under the impression that his haplogroup is R. And so if I understand it correctly, we're going to go to there was a discussion on Garfield's channel about this.
Yes,
last summer.
indeed. Actually, let me pull up the video so we can start things off. Give me a moment. And
yeah, so this was a discussion from back in I had it on the screen a second ago. This is from July of last year, and there was a discussion about Garfield's. There was the primary discussions mentioned. We mentioned Al-Azhar, the leader of Sakari. That was the primary focus of the discussion, and then a gentleman brought up the Divine Prospects haplogroup. That apparently multiple gentlemen on the panel were under the impression that Divine Prospects haplogroup was R. And as you mentioned, and another gentleman mentions, apparently at that time, Divine Prospect himself had started to say that, on the contrary, his haplogroup is T. And so that's basically going to be what we're focusing on here. What exactly is his haplogroup, and what are the claims that he's made about his haplogroup? And it's going to be interesting, first off, to show that multiple people were under the impression that it was R, and at least one gentleman says that he heard that directly from Divine Prospect himself.
Actually, before we get to that, because I want to make sure that my mixer completely forgot about the mixer portion where I need to connect this thing. So give me a second.
Okay, I can talk about what to look out for while you're doing that, and then you let me know when you're ready.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, so like I said, the first thing you're going to keep in mind is that the question in this segment is about what Divine Prospects haplogroup might be, because people are interested in the subject. What are the haplogroups of different figures, different people taking part in these discussions on Israelites? And full disclosure, because I think that raises the question about me, like, oh, you're talking about other people's haplogroups. What's your haplogroup? My haplogroup, likewise, is R1b. It's a haplogroup pretty much associated with Western Europe, although it may have started in Central Asia or something like that, but whatever the case. So I have haplogroup R, just to put that on the table. And there have been rumors floating around that Ron Shields has haplogroup R. There's even one gentleman, as you're about to see, he says that he heard that from Ron Shields himself, but Ron Shields is going to say that, on the contrary, his haplogroup is T. And so then there's going to be discussions about that and how clear his statements were on that. And you, by the way, you'll let me know when you're ready, right? Not sure if you, okay. So, and that's mainly what we're going to do.
By the way, were you able to hear that? I just want to.
No, I didn't hear anything.
You heard nothing. Okay, let me try one more time, because I
play
had.
From there. Let's see if we hear anything. Play from there.
Give me a second. All right, let me try this one more time.
What's happening? I just wanted to just
I can hear just fine.
Y'all hating on the R marker.
Oh yeah, we know you Western European too, Kyle. Go ahead.
Oh no, I'm straight up. Now, Divine Prospect also is R, so I didn't want to throw that out there.
Yeah, we know that.
Hey, real quick, to be fair.
Yeah, but he's trying to say he's T now. I got the screenshot.
That's what I'm saying. Like, he was on Clubhouse
saying he's T now.
Yeah, on Clubhouse, he was in the room. We were talking about DNA, and he said he's haplogroup T. So now, real quick, Kyle, so we can have you on record about this. Now, did you physically see his DNA results, or did he just tell you, or did you, like, you know what I'm saying? Because he's saying that his DNA results were haplogroup T.
Nah, so like I didn't physically see his results. He told me out of his mouth the results, and I think he actually we had a group chat a while back when I was a Hebrew Israelite. This is where we had a lot of contention, because he let us know in our group that what his DNA marker was. It was R1, whatever it is, right? But he was trying to trace himself back to the people of Gabon, and that's how he said that he was an Israelite, and that's how me and him kind of fell out. I'm like, bro, how the fuck is you teaching this? And everybody teaching got E1, B1A. But yeah, so I don't know if I can look at my Facebook messages if I still have those messages, but I never saw his DNA results in my face. But I got a
Kyle,
yo, what up?
What did they say your boy? What did they say his Y marker was?
Who's that?
Your boy Ron. What did they say, or what did he say? Or what was said about him?
You say it was R1 something, but whatever the people that live in the Gabon people, because there's some Jews that converted that was in Gabon, the Gabon tribe, whatever, and he claimed lineage from those people. That's how he was able.
You talking about Ron Dalton, or you talking about a different Ron?
Yeah, Ron Shields.
Ron Shields. Okay, my bad, bro.
Yeah.
I don't know if he was still. Yeah, I thought y'all. Okay, so you saying that Divine Prospect basically said he was R, because he's on Clubhouse now saying he's haplogroup T. So
I don't know about that, bro, because like we had a whole group about this, like a group discussion, and we were like, "That's why."
Yeah, I got a screenshot now, real quick. I got a screenshot of Divine literally saying he's haplogroup T now. You know what I'm saying? Like I showed 93.
I mean, you might have mutated it, bro.
I'm just saying he could be lying. I'm just saying like he could be lying about T, but I'm just, that's why I was asking.
All right. So now the main thing to take away from that is, again, multiple people, as you can see there, multiple people were under the impression that his haplogroup is R. Of course, it's possible that they could all be wrong. At least one gentleman said that he heard it from him himself. But again, he could be mistaken. That happens all the time. One of us might say something, somebody misunderstands, or they conflate it with something else. So as I understand it, we have a clip from a discussion, a Clubhouse discussion. We're going to look into the live chat where you had an interaction with Divine Prospect discussing his haplogroup, and he was clarifying that he's actually haplogroup T.
Yes, indeed. So what I'd like to do, and to give a little backdrop, so what we just showed took place after what I'm about to show right now. So
no, as I understand it, you're going to show the discussion from December.
The discussion from December. That's okay. My apologies.
Right.
Okay,
so the video we just looked at was in July. But he was already. People were already here, and you yourself had already seen him state that actually his haplogroup is T.
Yeah.
And so you you asked him to clarify that in December, is my understanding.
Correct. And if I could momentarily, I'd like to give a bit of a teaser, because we had a discussion prior to that. We had a discussion a few days prior to the relevant discussion that was just shown on your screen that took place on Garfield from Dagger Squad's channel. So just wanted to point that out. But what we're going to show now is a discussion that took place in December of this past year.
Right. You were finally getting him to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me actually pull that up. And if you could fill the audience in on what's going on here, and then I'll just pause and we'll read along. So
yeah. So as I said, actually what happened was Faithful was in a discussion with, this is a Clubhouse room, and Clubhouse has a live chat. And Faithful and Divine Prospect were both in that live chat. You might need to zoom in. Yeah. Okay. And
give me one moment. Let me just.
Okay. And when you're ready, you let me know. And of course, I'm having a little trouble seeing it, so you might have to read it.
Yeah.
But mainly, what was happening here is, as was just noted, there was some confusion about the haplogroup of Divine Prospect. Some people were saying that they heard from him directly that he's R, but he himself was starting to say that he's actually haplogroup T. I noticed Garfield wrote in the chat, so he's R and T. I think what was happening was he was apparently correcting people who were claiming that he was R, or that they heard it from himself. So that required some clarification. So Faithful, being in the same live chat on Clubhouse with him in December of last year, attempted to ask him directly about that, and that's what we're going to be looking at. I think you might need to zoom in a little.
Well, that's as far as I can go, because this is a video. So what I can do is I can read it. So it says, at Divine, I recall you mentioning that you were haplogroup T in a room with Jewish folks. So that was a room that he and I were also in. He and I had a back and forth in the live chat, and that discussion actually took place prior to the appearance on Garfield Reed, where I showed up on Garfield Reed and I inquired about his haplogroup, because of what he had said on Clubhouse and based on what others were saying. So I said, at Divine, I recall you mentioning that you were haplogroup T in a room with Jewish folks, but a former member of Kingdom Harbinger Ministries, Kyle, said you were one of the R's. Could you clarify for me what paternal haplogroup you are? So there I'm trying to be charitable, right? I want to ensure that
well, you're getting clarification. It does require some clarification, as obviously multiple claims are floating around at that point.
And if we could, as we see that this is in the room, so nobody thinks this was doctored or made up or anything like that. Here we go. I'll stop it right here. So this is Divine's response. He says, "At faithful to God, I never told Kyle that, so I have no clue where he got that info from. Plus, Kyle was never a part of Kingdom Harbinger Ministries." All right. So,
By the way, can I point out one thing? I noticed in your statement, right, when that first statement that you read,
yes.
your exact question at the end was, "Could you clarify for me what paternal haplogroup you are?"
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you're
right here.
clearly asking about his paternal haplogroup.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Just
Go
to
ahead,
be, yeah, not trying to be polemical, just want to be clear on what your paternal haplogroup is. Yes, I actually skipped over that portion, so it's right here. Let's see.
I'm saying it was. I'm just clarifying. It was also right at the start too in your question.
Yeah, here
There
it is. Could you
read that last sentence.
clarify for me what paternal haplogroup you are? So paternal, right?
Mhm.
And if I go back, I can see. Notice I say not trying to be polemical, just want to be clear on what your paternal haplotype is. So I'm being explicit with him. And so he says, "Faithful to God, I never told Kyle that, so I have no clue where he got that info. Plus, Kyle was never a part of Kingdom Harbinger Ministries." Then he says here, "Kyle was an associate of mine with his own subscriptions when he was in the faith." Right. So continuing, I believe Kyle no longer identifies as a Hebrew Israelite for the record. So
and Kyle was the gentleman who was speaking in that first clip we showed.
Correct. So as I respond, I say, "I see. This is essentially what I was told or what was told. But since we are on the subject, are you haplogroup, I should say, more specifically, haplogroup T paternally?"
Paternally. Keep that in mind. Paternally. He's answering questions about his paternal haplogroup.
Now look at his response at the bottom. "Yes, I have some haplogroup T markers, plural, but it's not dominant." All right.
That's curious. It's let me say this. I want to reiterate that I don't know a lot about Divine Prospect. He seems like a gentleman to me, so I don't intend anything mean-spirited when I say this, but that statement is difficult to interpret, and my impression is that it conveys an unfamiliarity with the subject. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful. We're all amateurs on this subject, and there's no shame if there's still a bit of a learning curve. But yeah, that was my impression from that. Okay.
So the right here, as we continue to read, it says, "We can go in depth in genetics in a private room if you like." Okay, so let me actually get to let it keep going down, get to the relevant portion. See if I can speed this along a little bit. All right. Here we go. Yes, here we go. "Wait. So you have this is my response to him. Wait, you have some haplogroup T markers, plural? I'm asking about the Y chromosome, meaning the paternal, the Y chromosome, which is singular. So, and there I had a bit of a typo, but I corrected it. So is your paternal marker singular T and not R?" So I'm going to say that again. So is your paternal marker singular T and not R? So
yeah, the singular is the clarification. We're talking about haplogroup singular. Right?
Yep. And so I'll get to the relevant portion. I'm just
and you also made clear it's your paternal haplogroup.
Yeah, and right here is the relevant portion. I'll pause it right there. Now he says, "I meant marker singular. As you can see, I'm typing fast since I cannot speak on stage at the moment. I took a DNA test back in 2012, he says." All right. So as this continues to go along, I want to reiterate that point again because I think that's salient. I meant marker singular. As you can see, I'm typing fast since I cannot speak on stage at the moment.
I'll say this: writing markers versus marker, sure, the S could be a typo, but not only that, he also said, "But it's not dominant," which also, that I don't think that was a typo. Saying, as if to say, "Yes, I have a haplogroup 2T marker, but it's not dominant." That also sort of conveys. It seems to convey a potential bit of confusion on the topic.
Yeah, and not to mention, as we're going to see in a little bit, this isn't the first time that he's used the term markers in the plural. Right.
But the main thing to take away from this is, it's pretty clear nonetheless, despite the apparent confusion, or we hope that's the most charitable. I noticed Garfield wrote in the chat, He's either referring to autosomal, obviously, or he's being deceptive. That's what I would say. Like the best case scenario is that maybe he's unfamiliar with the subject and he was making mistakes. The worst case scenario is that he may have been making some changes to his position on the fly. And, and again, I don't intend that disrespectfully. I'm just covering the possibilities.
Just based on what we're looking at, right? So it says right here, so this is Divine. He says, I plan to take another one next year, and I will disclose that update when I do at Faithful to God. What's your paternal haplogroup marker? I said, gotcha. We can discuss theology another time, about to leave. So I was on my way out, and I said, I haven't taken my test yet. I plan to very soon, hopefully, Lord willing. And I right, and there we go. And so we can see.
And by the way, so people might ask the question, well, what about Abu? As I've said earlier in the show, for those who missed it, my haplogroup.
And as you can see, there the conversation was cordial, so it wasn't anything hot sauce. So she says, "Faithful to God, sounds good, my brother. Enjoy your day. I'll chat with you another time."
Right.
So,
and by the way, I appreciate the cordiality of
As I said at the top, when I said we can discuss theology another time, I'm about to leave. Good talking to you, by the way, at Divine. So it was there was nothing malicious. I was really trying to glean what was going on. Now, keeping in mind that the discussion with Garfield had taken place months prior. So this was my first interaction with Divine. However, if we could, I think this would be a nice segue to show what happened prior to the Garfield live stream on Dagger Squad. So I think this would be a good time. And for the record, so people can see that there's nothing here. There's nothing, nothing else there. So I'll just go ahead and X out of here.
Right. So what became very clear, though, is that, so just to bring us back up to speed, there was some question about his paternal haplogroup. Multiple people were under the impression it was R. At least one gentleman was saying they heard it from him directly. But he himself is publicly saying it's T, right? So that's where we're at now. But again, we're talking about a paternal marker. I want to stress that. Paternal marker, the father's line. But go ahead. And now we're going to jump in. As I understand it, well, actually, there's some questions.
So if we could, let's give people a little bit of a backdrop to what's going on. So back in, when this took place in December, as I had remembered, I had taken a screenshot. So if anybody listened, I mentioned a screenshot. So I sent everybody a screenshot of, which we're going to look at in a moment because it's coming from this same relevant conversation on Clubhouse. I had screenshotted where Divine was having an interaction with a Jewish person, and he mentioned having haplogroup T. That's why my inquiry was about haplogroup T. So I initially thought that the Clubhouse room had been deleted, like it hadn't been recorded. I was under that impression at the moment. What ended up happening, however, was we ended up by great chance, my friend Abu went and he searched on Clubhouse, and he actually was able to find a room because the title of the room was in the original screenshot. What you guys are going to look at now is the room after it had finished. The relevant screenshot that I showed initially, it actually had the title of the room while it was happening live. So what's interesting is when we look.
But by the way, before we do that, there's the question about if T is his paternal haplogroup. Remember the questions?
Yes, paternal, right? So if I could just so everybody understands. When we went looking through, we were able to grab screenshots to show precisely that the argument seemed to be quite different than the one that our friend Divine was presenting in December. So where he's saying that he has a paternal T. Well, as we're going to find out in a moment. Now, this is from July, I believe. Let me see. This is July the 4th, 2022. Just for the record, and to be on record about this, the live stream with Garfield took place on what date?
July 10th.
The 10th of July. So this was days prior. This was days prior to that. So if I could, this is before the live stream with Garfield, what I'm about to show in a moment. Here it is.
Wait, before we jump to that, do you remember? It's a point 3 on our notes. The questions that are raised if T is his paternal marker.
Yes, give me.
I mean, we could go to it after we look at these screenshots.
If you could present it to the audience, because
Oh, you want me to just?
Yes, if you could present it, yeah.
Read it aloud. I don't have it in front of me. That's the only problem.
Okay, if you'd like, I can pull it up on my end.
Just because before we jump to the maternal question.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Plug in my
Yes,
phone.
here we go. No, I got it. I got it right here. Yep.
Okay.
I need you to mute while I'm.
No problem. You can still hear me though, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But I hear your background. All right. So if I could, all right, here we go. And the relevant question is, if divine prospect's paternal haplogroup is T, that would raise a couple methodological questions. A, what is his definition of Israelite? Meaning paternal, something else? Or B, what flood model does he hold to? Now, could you explain to the audience why these questions are salient?
Okay, so regarding the first question, question A, what is his definition of Israelite? As we said at the start, most people within the Hebrew Israelite spectrum hold to a paternal definition of Israelite, which is where you are an Israelite if your strict paternal line goes back to Jacob. It doesn't really matter what women your paternal line mixed with. What makes you an Israelite is whether or not you descend from Jacob on your strict paternal line, your father's father's father, if it goes back to Jacob. And so we've seen some people like the Teo twins jettison that in real time. They used to hold to a paternal definition and then they abandoned it. We'll get to that later in the show. So there's a question about, for Ron Shields, for Divine Prospect, what is his definition of Israelite? Because if he holds to a paternal definition of Israelite, then of course paternal haplogroup matters, right?
Yeah.
If he doesn't, then it doesn't matter. Regarding that second question, I noticed there's a gentleman in the live chat, Israelite only camp killer IOCK. He said that our haplogroup is Japhet. So I bring that up because the flood model depends, helps to play a role. I always say this, like how you interpret the human Y-DNA phylogenetic tree, the haplogroups of different human beings, how you interpret that and try to reconcile it with the Bible is going to depend heavily on your flood model. There are some people out there who hold to a local flood model, which could limit the descendants of Noah to just a portion of the Y-DNA phylogenetic tree. Like, for example, they might all be E carriers, or they might all be J carriers, or whatever, T carriers, etc. But on a global flood model, and I'm under the impression that the vast majority of Israelites, if not all of them, but the vast majority hold to a global flood model. On a global flood model, we would all descend paternally from Noah. So Noah would essentially be what's known as Y chromosomal Adam. And as a result, you would have to assign the haplogroups, like a gentleman in the chat said that haplogroup R falls under Japhet. That may be the case, maybe not. But on a global flood model, it would seem pretty much to be the case. I mean, that would seem to be the safest bet. And likewise, on a global flood model, T would be very difficult to disconnect. Like if you see where it falls on the phylogenetic tree, it would be difficult to disconnect T from other haplogroups traditionally associated with Europe, which of course would then inspire people to associate the relevant haplogroups that are associated with Europe with Japhet, like a guy in the chat did. And that's why those questions are relevant. What's his definition of Israelite? Is it paternal? And what kind of flood model does he hold to, global or local? Those are the questions. Because if his haplogroup is T, and on a global flood model, the temptation would be to connect him to Japhet. Not only him, me, and others, but nonetheless, that's worthy.
But if I could jump in just momentarily, just for a moment, what I want to highlight is something salient, right? Because according to the relevant questions, it becomes much harder on a global model than it does on a local model. And a local model in no way negates the biblical text. I think sometimes people fall in love with the usage of world in the English, but the relevant phrase haaretz just means the land, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we could do a discussion on that. If I recall correctly, you even hosted a debate on global versus local flood models. Maybe we can put some links in the video description after the show. Absolutely. And by the way, we're going to link to all our sources in the video description after the show.
And keep in mind that my position on the topic has changed since then. So I just want to be on record about that. But nevertheless, if we could now show some of the relevant screenshots. Let me actually do it. Here we go.
So you went back and looked at, go ahead, you set this up. You went back and looked into some of the statements he had said back in July.
So tell me if you guys can see this. Is this big enough for everyone to see? All right, here we go.
Yeah, now it is,
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go left to right. Or maybe I should go right to left.
No, left to right, because
left to right?
On the left are the earlier ones.
Okay, so here we go. Right, I see the timestamps, correct. So if we
just
look right here.
One more time to make sure it's absolutely clear. There were questions about his paternal haplogroup, and so December you were questioning him about his paternal haplogroup, and he was saying that his paternal haplogroup, the haplogroup of his father's line, was.
So I want to highlight this. So this was in the room. Can you give the people the name of the room, more or less the rough name of the room?
It was titled something, and I'll later on we'll put the
We'll
full
put
title
the
and a
links.
link
Yeah,
in the video description. But the title was something like "Why are Hebrew Israelites accused of being a cult?" And it's
yeah,
from
like something like that, roughly like that, right?
So it aired late at night on July 3rd. So if you find it on Clubhouse, and we'll link to it later on, it
And
aired
it ended on July 4th, and it ended
exactly
on
because
July
it crossed
because
over
it
midnight. So yeah,
crossed over midnight, correct? So here's Divine Prospect in the relevant room. So this is around the 7-hour, 23-minute, and 44-second mark.
Yep,
And he
this is
says,
the wee hours of July 4th.
right, and he says, at Michelle, on my mom's side, I have Sephardim T haplogroup markers due to Sephardic Jews settling on the island of St. Thomas. I also have West African and Central African maternal DNA markers as well. Would I be considered a Jew? And then he puts the eye emoji. So here's what's interesting. So in the relevant video that we showed highlighting the conversation in real time, as everyone could see earlier, he was saying that T was his paternal marker. But here he seems to be arguing and keeping in mind that this is from the 4th of July, 2022. So he is saying here that he has Sephardim T haplogroup. Yet when I asked him the question, and keep in mind, I was in this live chat as well. I wasn't having a conversation directly with him. But I was nevertheless able to at least grab one of these screenshots. All of these screenshots that we have here were grabbed after the fact, literally recently, because we went back to look for because I had mentioned that I had seen him mentioning T quite a few times. At the time, I wasn't aware that he made an appeal to the maternal, that he was making, an appeal to the maternal T. I was under the impression that it was perhaps paternal, but when
it was very clear when you questioned him in December that you meant paternal.
December, it was very clear, right? There was no ambiguity. So if he's making an appeal to maternal T in July 4th of 2022, and then in December now it shifts to paternal, that's a little suspicious. That seems greatly suspicious. Being that he didn't mention maternal T, he could have said I am paternally and maternally T, but he doesn't even say that. So here he's arguing for maternal T, and when I spoke to him, he seemed to argue that now his DNA is paternally T. So I want to just highlight that for everybody. And
let's see, and that gets repeated in some of the other statements in the screenshot.
Yeah, if I could just read it. It says, Divine Prospect says, Michelle, based on my, and by the way, Michelle was a Jewish woman in the chat. Michelle, based on my DNA I shared, would I be considered a Jew, haplogroup T? Notice again, he's making an appeal to the maternal on my mom's side, right? So there's no ambiguity here. And how do we know? Because we're gonna see in a moment after he repeats it again. This is at the 7-hour, 34-minute, and 2-second mark. Am I a Jew based on the DNA info I shared haplogroup T? Then what he ends up doing is he shares an article from nature.com that talks about maternal lineages, maternal T.
Yeah, I'll put that link in the video description as well when I send you the sources. Yeah, so this will all be available. But yeah, it was an article on Nature. Yeah,
that talks about maternity. So unambiguously arguing for maternal. So interestingly enough, because I didn't see this portion the first time, keeping in mind for anybody that looks in the room, I was on stage, I was engaging in conversation, or sometimes I was just, talking with people in the back channel. People were back channeling me. I was typing away at them. So what's interesting is that when I noticed what Divine posted after the fact, this is literally a few days back when we were doing research for the relevant stream that we're doing right now, to make sure that we have all our eggs in the basket lined up. It was interesting to see this, and then in hindsight realized that he was making an appeal he was making a literal appeal with me to paternity when he was arguing for maternity back in July.
And the question is, how do we understand this? Because it is difficult to understand what's going on here because he's saying different things at different points.
Now, if I could, I'd like to point out something. And so this is going to be something that's going to be on record because I spoke with the individual. So there's a gentleman named Ngozi, and he and I had a conversation earlier today in the wee hours while I was preparing for this. And I asked him the question, if I could share this information. So he gave me permission to share this. So this is going to be on record, and he stands behind this. He informed me that he witnessed a live stream of Divine Prospect where Divine Prospect himself was attempting to kind of push back against DNA, and he himself said that he was haplogroup R. So he said he was R1b. He said that Divine shared that he was R1b paternally.
So that's two people. So Ngozi and Khayal both say they heard it directly from from Divine Prospect.
Correct. And of course there are others, and we won't name them, but you're aware of one individual who himself also verified that he had heard that Divine was
although he didn't hear it from Divine Prospect, but yeah,
he didn't hear it from Divine. Correct. He heard it from someone else. Correct. So I find it fascinating, and I think this brings us to the following. I think that if we could just give a brief summary.
Yes.
All right, here we go. And the summary is, if I could just, here we go. So just so we're clear, giving a summary. Multiple people have been under the impression that Divine Prospect's haplogroup is R. One person publicly stating that Divine Prospect himself told him that.
So now we have two people who have said that. Go ahead.
Correct. Divine Prospect seemed to clearly answer a question about his paternal haplogroup by stating that he was T. However, elsewhere, Divine Prospect also clearly states that his maternal haplogroup is T. Some might feel tempted to wonder if this is evidence of his story changing over time. But as some of his statements are difficult to interpret, another possibility is that he was simply confused. Divine Prospect is asked if he might be so kind as to clarify what his paternal Y-DNA haplogroup might be.
Yeah, I mean, the other possibility is to say that the two people who said they heard it from him are mistaken, and maybe he has both T and on his paternal and maternal markers. I don't consider that particularly likely, but nonetheless, we'll see. Hopefully, he clarifies. I thought that was fascinating. It was interesting,
But nevertheless,
and again, no offense intended to the gentleman. Like I said, he always seems like a real gentleman, so there's no ill will.
And if I could just for a moment, so we can segue now to because we're going to talk about Ron Dalton in a moment. We're going from one Ron to another Ron. What's interesting is I had a conversation with Ron recently. We had a conversation. Unfortunately, the room was not saved, so it was early in January, roughly somewhere around January, and we had a conversation about DNA, and I asked him, how does he, I asked him if he determines anything morphologically of who is an Israelite morphologically, and he said no. But when I asked him the question about DNA, his answers seemed to be very vague. It was almost like he didn't have a clear answer, so I didn't get a clear response. He did seem to make an appeal to the idea of cultural affinity, something to that effect, like maybe cultural affinity. And he seemed to read several papers, and I don't think he interpreted the papers correctly, because I went and looked for one of the papers, and it seemed that it perhaps seemed to be the case that maybe he didn't understand what he was looking at. Perhaps the viewpoint of the relevant author, who himself is a geneticist, he didn't seem to understand what was being stated, because his response seemed to be this idea of just dismiss DNA outright and just look for cultural affinities or similarities. And to me, that just seems like absolutely flawed. And I don't think that's necessarily the intent that was being conveyed by the relevant paper. But I think that nevertheless, I do want to know how he goes about determining this, because I think once we get into the DNA question, I think it becomes problematic, especially for this idea of just mere similarity, because I think that, to me, creates more false positives than anything else, to be perfectly honest. But anyways, with that being said, I think now is a good time to segue to talk about our good friend Ron Dalton.
Yes, who has a very popular documentary that was at the center of the controversy over the NBA player Kyrie Irving tweeting a documentary. It was Ron Dalton's documentary titled Hebrews to Negroes, I believe. It was from like 2018, and I think we're going to show a clip from this because I watched it and I tweeted about it. So we have a tweet I think you'll be pulling up. By the way, while you're setting that up, I'll respond to something in the chat. Manny Jones writes, DNA, flesh, does not inherit eternal life. And then eternal life, excuse me. And he quotes 1 Corinthians 15. We agree wholeheartedly. We're not saying that your salvation hinges on your lineage or anything like that. This is more of an intellectual question, an intellectual exploration, and an academic question. Because discussions with members of the diverse Israelite spectrum often hinge on claims about lineage. We're not saying that your standing with God is impacted by your haplogroup or anything like that. But because discussions on lineage are often so central to discussions with Israelites, it becomes an interesting academic topic to look into. How do you trace lineage? What are the best tools for that? I personally think that Y-DNA is the best tool available today for tracing or getting a sense of not only an individual's paternal line, but also the spectrum of paternal lines that can exist within a people group, whether it be like, a specific morphological group or a linguistic group, or even the entire human species. And so, like I
Absolutely.
said, that's Manny says, thank you. I'm grateful for your ministry.
Yep. And if I can, I'm going to show the relevant tweet. Hopefully you can see this. Hopefully it shows up.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, so I'll read it where it says, Ron Dawson's 2018 film, Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up Black America, claims the Y-DNA of Native Americans, Australian Aboriginals, and Polynesians was found among the Natufian samples. This is, at best, highly misleading, and at worst, flatly false. So I'll play the relevant portion. Let me just put my sound mix, and hopefully you can hear.
Obtained from Dorothy Garrett's Natufian skeletons found inside the caves in Israel dating back to... Data was obtained from Dorothy Garrett's Natufian skeletons found inside the caves in Israel dating back to BC times. Now, these skeletons revealed the presence of the Y-DNA of the Allura tribe, the Dogon tribe in Mali, Native American Indians, Australian Aborigines, the Dravidian Indian, the Black Arab Bedouins, the Pacific Islanders, Somalians, the Habesha people in Ethiopia, and the so-called Bantus Negro in Israel. Data was obtained from...
Okay.
All right, there we go. So, relevant to that, I think, can you explain, perhaps for the audience, the uncarefulness of such a statement?
Well, it's just completely confusing. So, and that's often the case with Dalton. He throws a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and it's very hard to, be sure what he's saying. Oftentimes, it's clear that he himself is confused. Other times, maybe you say, all right, well, maybe the reader just doesn't understand what he's saying. Maybe there's just a lack of clarity. But yeah, what he seems to be saying that was within a larger discussion about haplogroups.
Right.
So it seems to be that he's saying that the Natufians had haplogroups that are also found amongst Australian Aborigines and some Native Americans, right? And I spoke with other people who were familiar with this documentary, and they were saying that they're under the impression that what happened was Dalton looked at an old paper on the Natufians and saw CT, that, CT was, it's this sort of old macro haplogroup, and it was put as a sort of placeholder because they couldn't really identify the full haplogroup of some of the Natufians. So they were listed as CT, and Dalton saw CT, and then he saw that haplogroup C is found amongst the Australian Aborigines and a minority of Native Americans, and therefore he leaped to the conclusion that they have the same haplogroup as the Natufians, which is
right.
It's confusion, to put it mild.
Right. So if we see it right here, it says E1B1B1, originally classified as CT, but further defined as E1B1B1 by Martiniano in 2020. So this was updated. This is the relevant paper updating the information here. So if anybody is interested, they can actually look at it right here. This is the relevant paper. So just wanted to point that out. So this was originally published in
looks like February 2022, if I'm mistaken.
Well, it says 2022 there, but there's actually a paper here. I'll go to the bottom. Here we go. So everybody can see my screen, right? Okay, good. Let me actually go to I believe it was this one, if it would go directly to it. And it would actually give the when the date it was. Let's see if it's...
That's right there. It says 2020 there. December of 2020.
Yeah, you see it?
Yeah.
Here it is. Yeah, here we go. Yep. Just wanted to point that out. All right. With that being said, just wanted to have that on record. And if we could, just looking at the relevant video, I just wanted to point this out because I think it's relevant. If we could go through this briefly, because I think that's a very uncareful claim that he was attempting to make, and it shows his unfamiliarity with DNA. Here we go. So this is a map of Y chromosomes before the colonial period. All right. So this is a distribution, and I just wanted to maybe highlight some of this very briefly.
So just to be clear, I don't see it on the screen yet.
Yep, I'm showing it now.
Okay.
Here we
All
go.
right. I see it now.
So if we can go to South America, we'll notice that the relevant haplogroups are predominantly Q3 and C3.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Now,
So
going
too
to
in North America, there's
now,
also
when-
some C.
Now, when we go to the Aboriginals, there's C4 and K4. However, let's look over here in Africa. Matter of fact, even if one looks at the Middle East, but anyways, if we look at Africa, interestingly enough, well, there doesn't seem to be any of these haplogroups that are apparently supposed to be there, and oops, I don't know what happened there. Oh, actually, yeah. If we could, let me actually just bring this up since it's already here. That's a
Yes, this is relevant.
convenient segue. So if we could, this is the phylogenetic tree, right? Starting
Mhm.
at the top, going all the way down. So these are the various branches, and keeping in mind that these are significant distances in time from each other. So this isn't like 1 year later or something like that. So
Mhm.
as you can see by the relevant tree,
Right. You have that branch for CT, which is basically CT covers most human beings on the planet, right?
yeah,
Those who carry haplogroup E, which would be the majority of the West African diaspora, and therefore presumably the majority of African Americans who identify as Israelites, have haplogroup E, which is a descendant of CT. And then for Native Americans and Australian Aborigines who have haplogroup C, that's also a descendant of CT. But the thing is, if you're going to make both E carriers and C carriers descendants of Jacob, you would have to put Jacob back at CT. And if it's the CT that
Right.
gave rise to both E and C, that would cover basically the entire planet. Because then
correct.
our carriers like myself, and maybe a friend of ours who we mentioned earlier, our carriers would be Israelites. Everybody would be a descendant of Jacob on this kind of model. Just almost everyone with the exception of A and B carriers.
Yeah.
you know?
Well, several of the people that you mentioned, Guerilla Hebrew, and
Almost the whole
Mr.
planet would descend from Jacob.
potentially even Mr. Prospect if he does turn out to be R.
Well, no, either way, because T also descends from CT.
Right, correct.
So everybody,
Yep.
basically all Ashkenazi Jews would be paternal descendants of
we have it right
Jacob.
here.
Everybody, yeah.
Here goes which gave rise to T right there. So if we could just pointing this out, so CT, right, gives rise to two branches, DE and CF, right? And from DE is where you get E. Now notice where E is here. C is over here. These are two different branches. These are not the same immediate people group. These are two separate people groups on two separate parts of the phylogenetic tree. Now, ultimately, all of these go back to one, as you can see right there. But the point being that you have C, you have E. So this is E. You have the C's over here. And Native Americans are all the way over here in Q.
And some C. There's a minority of C, which is
there is a minority of C. Keeping in mind that these Native Americans, they're not C because the progenitor gave rise to one son who was C and another son who was Q. Rather, you have different people groups, individual people groups, perhaps joining together, as was the case in antiquity, where, for example, you go to a region, you have an area where you have tribal groups that join together. And perhaps these tribal groups aren't even paternally, ethnically descended from the same base population of people, but socially, I guess in a sociological sense, they join together based on a language that perhaps both groups were born into. A great example of that is the United States of America, where we live in a country where you have people with different lineages paternally, yet we have a shared language, in some instances even shared cultures, musical expressions, that kind of thing, being that this is a melting pot. But you can find this also being the case in antiquity in other parts of the world. So C and then perhaps Q came together. But what wouldn't be the case is that C and Q both have the same paternal progenitor. they would have different progenitors because they descend from different people groups.
Yeah, I mean, to sum it up really easily, I would say I'd put it this way. It's because I think it captures how confused Ron Dalton is. If you're going to say that C carriers and E carriers both descend from Jacob, then almost the entire planet descends from Jacob. He undermines all his polemics against mainstream Jews, against European populations, because they all descend from CT. You know, and so it's indicative, with all due respect to Ron Dalton, it's indicative of the confusion that he has on the subject. And now that documentary was from 2018, but his confusion continues to this day, because when people try to have conversations with him on DNA, he's all over the place. And he basically, you know, he'll appeal to haplogroups and then he'll toss it out the window and try to like identify people as Semitic based on their outward appearance and their culture, you know?
Correct. And if we could, I'd like to show a portion of your discussion with Mr. Dalton. It seems that Ron Dalton, and for the record, if I'm not mistaken, I believe he even had a debate with a Hebrew Israelite who does seem to have familiarity with DNA. One Yeshub, I believe.
Genesis, yes, from the Yap Gang, and honestly, in my opinion, Yeshub ran the table in that debate.
Yeah, I would agree that Yeshub clearly had a much better grasp of DNA knowledge than Dalton. Dalton seemed, no disrespect intended, but just seemed very incognizant, very I don't even know how to say it without, I don't want to be disrespectful.
Well, I'll say this. For me, it was eye-opening because I thought Ron Dalton had a much more coherent position on why DNA. And what that debate with Yeshub exposed is that Ron Dalton was incredibly confused, you know? I mean, for me, one of the most glaring moments in that debate was Ron Dalton was trying to say that, like, the people of Papua New Guinea are also Israelites. So Yeshub explained what haplogroups are found amongst the people of Papua New Guinea. They're closer to European populations. And Ron Dalton said, you know, basically he talked about their morphology. And then he said, I spoke to one of them on the phone and they said they have a story about how they came to those islands, or they came to that area on a boat, and they used to have a book of law, which they dropped off the side of the boat and lost. And Yeshub said, so I'm telling you about DNA and he's telling you a story that someone told him over the telephone.
Yeah, just right. It's like that kind of thing, right? Now, if we could, I'd like to present your discussion on Clubhouse. This was your discussion on Clubhouse.
Yes, I got to speak with Ron Dalton briefly on Clubhouse.
Now, if you just give me a moment so I can run this through my sound mix, if you can
No problem. So basically, another thing that came up to set this up, another thing that came up in the debate between Ron Dalton and Yeshub was a question about their haplogroups. And, you know, Yeshub clearly said his haplogroup, he's a carrier of E1B1A. He has a subclade of E1B1A. And then when Ron Dalton was asked, he said he has not taken a DNA test yet. And so, you know, Yeshub pointed out that he should take one. I mean, you're discussing DNA. Maybe you should take your own DNA. That was a year before this conversation that I had with him on Clubhouse. I wanted to, you know, get an update, see if he had taken a test since then. And so I guess we're going to hear some of that.
This, you know what I teach, you know what's in my books, my movies, you know what I say on Clubhouse, and
you gotta back it up a little bit.
If you are his game, and it's none of your business if I took my DNA test.
A little bit more than that, because you got to hear my question. You learned your haplogroup. It's a noted perfect
on the topic of Ron Dalton's DNA are related to that, and these excerpts will run for slightly over 4 minutes. Here you go.
So what I was saying, I narrowed it down to two. I myself, when I first came in, I made the point that you can't determine a person's paternal lineage by their outward appearance. And I noted potential haplogroups that could go back to the Khazars, but I noted that as the Ashkenazim are so diverse, they can't simply be all waved off as Khazars. And so when you have these diverse groups, rather than thinking of the group collectively, and this applies to any group, it even applies to the West African diaspora in the Americas, it's better to think on an individual level than on a group level. So, for example, let me use you as an example. I remember when you had your debate with Yeshub, there was a question about whether you had taken a DNA test. And at the time you said you hadn't. I'm curious, have you taken a DNA test since then? Have you learned your haplogroup?
Let me ask you a question. You know what I teach. So
that's really none of his business, Ron. You don't even have to.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah, that's just he's just trying to what's the word for it? He's trying to be like, I know his game. I know his game. And it's none of your business if I took my DNA test. You know what I teach. You know,
you can pause it there.
You know what I say on Clubhouse. And you know the facts that I give you are correct and they're sound. And you know,
you can pause it there if you want.
That I present to you
And the rationale that I've been giving everybody on the stage in the audience is sounding correct. You didn't even say nothing about the fact that the ancient Israelites intermarried with the Canaanites and the Egyptians and the Cushites for
I would
hundreds
say
of
you can
thousands
pause.
of years.
Like me to comment on that? But just yeah, okay. So what was relevant there is, as you saw on the screen. So again, someone was asking him about his haplogroup, since he puts a lot of emphasis on haplogroups for defining who is an Israelite. And in the past, he said he didn't take a DNA test. By the time I asked him, his response was nervous laughter, hesitation, and then to say that it's none of your business. And for me, as others have pointed out, for me, that's a red flag, because I think if Ron Dalton took a DNA test and got E1B1A, I mean, he's been saying for years that E1B1A is an Israelite marker. If he got E1B1A, he would proudly put that out there. He would say, yeah, I took my test and it's E1B1A and that's Jacob's haplogroup or something like that. But instead, it was nervous laughter and it's none of your business. For me, that's curious, to put it mildly. That's the most charitable way I could put it. That is curious.
Perplexing.
And it tempts one to speculate that maybe he got something that he didn't like.
Yeah. But then again, we also could be wrong. But it seems curious, as you said, that he wouldn't share that he was, or the fact that he didn't share that he was either C, since he was making an appeal to C, or E1B1A, right? Like to show either or. I would imagine that he would say, yeah, I'm haplogroup C. Look, you could watch my documentary, or or something like that. Even though he doesn't explicitly say C, of course he's appealing to, or the people group that he that primarily have C. But nevertheless, I find it fascinating, right? It is curious. Would you like us to play a little bit more of that, or
no? There's no need.
Okay.
It was just to capture that. We're sort of just having a good time examining some of the lower hanging fruit.
Speaking of low hanging fruit, I think a good time to segue.
Yeah, it's a good time to go to our friends, the Teo twins.
The Teo twins, that's right.
Who have said that unlike everybody else, they know about DNA.
Oh yeah.
Unlike ignorant people like me, and ignorant people like you, and ignorant people like the Yap Gang, the Teo twins have actually done research, actually read the scientific papers.
Yeah, and remember, they determined patrilineal descent, or they did at one point. Autosomally. Autosomally.
Well, we'll get to that. Yeah, they came up with that when their haplogroup didn't work out for them anymore.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, here we go. So if I could, here we go.
Oh yes, excellent. Yeah. So this is something that they wrote back in November. So just to give a bit of a background, Orthodox Moore has helped me fill in some of the blanks on this. Orthodox Moore says that they were amongst the spectrum of people who were influenced by Stephen Darby, and the late Stephen Darby taught that all African Americans have E1B1A. He was mistaken about that. No shame in that. 93, I think, was going to mention that as well. But whatever the case, Stephen Darby was teaching that all African Americans had E1B1A. He was mistaken about that, but it was early on in the discussion, so no shame.
And if I could read this, and by the way, could you give people a date for this? This is spring 2021. I see it right there.
Yeah. So, but just to give, I'm attempting to give the background to this. So, Orthodox Moore was telling me that the Teo twins sort of came out of that Darbyite spectrum, believing that they held to a paternal line, and there was genetic evidence to show the whole West African diaspora descended paternally from Jacob, right? Because they all have this haplogroup that's allegedly Israelite in origin, and so the Teo twins were apparently under that perspective, and they held to a paternal definition of Israelite at that time. But then they found out that their own haplogroup was not E1B1A; it was haplogroup G, which is a pretty early European haplogroup. And so they didn't initially jettison their paternal definition. They tried to come up with another way to hold to a paternal definition without appealing to haplogroups. So that's the context of this. This is them in that transitional phase.
Yeah, if I could read this, it says, Al-Delmasi al-Mahatani, we believe in patrilineal descent, but we do not think that haplogroup is a valid method to determine patrilineal descent. Wait, what? Oh man. You get 50% of your DNA from your father. You can use this 50% autosomal result from your father for patrilineal determination.
You see that? And that's going to come up in a moment. You see the way he's thinking.
Yeah. This is already ridiculous. No one wants to look at the haplogroup science to see the many problems with it. I guess the many problems for them. I guess that I guess that is because they have not been trained to look at the data with a fine-tooth comb like we do. Oh, yeah. The
Forgive me.
experts haven't been trained, but these Johnny-come-latelys who seem to be, and no disrespect, but I have to say it that
So
way.
just to be clear, he wasn't attributing that to like actual geneticists, because they pretend that the geneticists all agree with them.
Oh,
he's referring to people like me, you, Orthodox Moor, the Yap Gang, anyone who tries to make an appeal to haplogroups to determine or to get insight on paternal DNA. They're basically saying that, well, you didn't look into the problems with it.
Of course. So basically, you guys aren't as smart as us. Okay. Yep. So continuing to read, it says, our analytical skills have been developed over decades. So some of these guys who argue against us
are how funny this is.
Yeah. So some of these guys who argue against us are spouting media mantra and not scientific papers. Okay. Or they make assumptions that the papers never claim, kind of like they make assumptions that the papers never claim. But patrilineal is not limited to using haplogroups. Autosomal is the best option even for patrilineal. Okay.
That was great.
Yeah.
So, but the highlighted part is the most significant for what we're going to discuss. Although I'm glad you read beyond it, because it also shows how bad his reasoning was, and we'll get to that in a moment. But clearly, they were still in the phase of holding to a patrilineal definition of Israelite, which is to say, they were still holding to this idea that if you descend paternally from Jacob, then you're an Israelite, irrespective.
Oh, and for the record, for people to know, this was around the time, I think, what was it, November 2021, when he was going to have you and he said basically he was going to have you and vocab running with your tails between your legs.
If you can show that, I love that. That's a great tone setter.
Yeah. Let me actually because I gotta show.
You notice,
I gotta show that
changed.
No. I mean, honestly, the absurdity. I mean, it's just
the tone has changed. That you can see. I spoke with much more charity about Divine Prospect, because, like I said, he seems like a gentleman. He seems like a humble guy, But the Teo twins are much more rude and arrogant, and
and we're not trying to meet their rudeness with rudeness.
No, not at all, at all. But I think it at least tempts one to.
But the level of arrogancy is certainly
it tests the level of charity. I'll say that.
Yes. Actually, let me do something real quick while I pull this up. If you just give me a second. All right, here we go. Okay. Yep. While I'm doing that,
you need the name of the file.
Yes, precisely.
Yacoba FB. Yacoba -FB.
That's what it was. Yeah,
2021.
That's what I was looking for. Yep. All right, here we go. All right, got it right here. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I have several windows open, so let me actually open this screen right here. Let's see, do it this way. Yep, got it right here.
So we're just showing this for fun, This is just for fun. But this
Abu's goal is to cause division within Israel, quote unquote Israel, but he will end up like vocab, running away with his tail between his legs.
Yeah, so that's him, bragging about how allegedly somehow he put vocab to flight, and he's going to do the same to me. That was in November of 2021, if I recall correctly. Since then, he's blocked me on most of social media. He's blocked the entire Yap Gang, which was initially very cordial with him. And it's, with all due respect, I mean, if we're accusing people of running, I don't like to do that. But since he raised that, he's accusing vocab of running. He's saying he's going to have me running. Basically, he's been reduced. Him and his brother have been reduced to just bluffing behind, from the safety of a block wall,
right?
The safety of behind the block wall, where they prevent all criticism from getting inside their little echo chamber and their bubble, and they just assure their faithful followers who are permitted inside the bubble that. They're beating everybody up.
Yeah, you're not as smart as them. Remember that,
Yeah.
All right, so let me actually go ahead and if we can, let's go to the second clip. The second clip. Let me actually.
Right, we're gonna show a clip from when I got to interact with one of the Teo twins on Berean TV. And this is relevant to that screenshot you just showed, where, the thing about them holding to a paternal position, where they don't want to appeal. Again, they don't want to appeal to haplogroups anymore, because they found out that their haplogroup is a minority haplogroup within the African-American spectrum.
Could you share what it is? Could you tell people what they're...
It's G. And
G ain't nothing but the G thing. That's right.
Right. Overwhelmingly, the odds are in favor of them descending paternally from a European. And so they no longer wanted to appeal to haplogroups once they understood the problem with that. And that's why they were saying in that screenshot you saw, oh, well, why don't you determine your paternal line autosomally, because you should have 50% of your father's DNA, which is just completely confused. So as we listen to this clip, what I want people to look out for is note that he's going to rightly point out that you have 50% of your father's DNA, but he's trying to use that to determine like the autosomal connection you would have to a paternal ancestor who's more than one generation away. Like obviously in reality, you have 50% of your father's DNA and 25% of his father's DNA, and maybe 12 to 13% of, you know, your great grandfather's DNA, and so on. He didn't understand that. He seems to think that it'll always be 50% of like your paternal ancestor. Wait, pause there for a second. And one thing I want people to listen to and listen out for real quick is I'm pointing out that like if your paternal ancestor started marrying into a population that's different, let's say you're Chinese and they're marrying into a population in Nigeria or something like that, or vice versa, you're going to be, after 7 generations, you'll be 99% autosomally indicative of the population that your paternal line was marrying into, right? You won't be anything like your paternal ancestor 7 generations back, autosomally. And listen out for how he says you're never going to reach 99%, because he thinks no matter how many times a paternal line mixes into a population, it always stays 50% autosomally indicative of that paternal population. So good.
So just to be clear, if a person descends from Jacob paternally, just on their strict paternal line, but on their other lines of descent, they, you know, their father and their father's father and their father's father, they kept on marrying European women, so they're 95%, let's say, European. If they descend paternally from Jacob, are they an Israelite on your view?
Do you understand what you're saying? You're saying that, hold on, in every case, it's a male marrying a European female. So in that case, they're carrying Jacob's line every single generation. So you're not losing it. It's not being diluted. It is the maternal that's being diluted, not the paternal. So in your scenario, you have no loss. You always get 50% of the father, right? With the birth of a child, you get 50% of your mother and you get 50% of your father. So if your father is always a male coming from Jacob, you always have 50% of Jacob. You're not going to lose it.
No, I think that's not the case. Because look, if you have a person, let's say we have an Israelite and a non-Israelite, right? Israelite male, non-Israelite female. The child will be 50% of one thing and then 50% of that non-Israelite population. Their next son, if the son of that son who's 50% non-Israelite, from this non-Israelite population, another quarter, if they go on to have another son with a woman from that population, what you're going to get is a situation where they're 25% indicative of their grandfather and 75% indicative of the population that their mother and grandmother came from. And then if you go again, another son, you get a situation where it's somewhere around 12%. That's why within 7 generations, if a certain person who's not from a population, if their male line keeps marrying into a population that they're not from, within 7 generations, they're going to produce a son that's like 99% indicative of that population.
Well, I mean, your scenario is, look, go ahead and Google what genes a child of their parents get. It's always 50% of the father, 50% of the mother, right?
But he's saying about 3 generations. But by the time
it doesn't matter. He might start looking more white because of his mother's side. But he's always getting 50% of his father. Now,
you're saying that
Abu is saying that
50% of 50% is 25%.
Abu is saying that he can be bred out. Abu is saying he might get bred out, and maybe that.
Hold on, Abu.
That's your scenario. Your scenario. You're saying at some point he keeps diluting, right? So I'm like, okay, at what point does he receive some other DNA other than his father? Because your scenario is he's always a descendant of Jacob.
Yes, he would still be a descendant of Jacob, and therefore those who actually hold, and I'm not saying you have to hold to a paternal definition of Israelite, but on a paternal definition of Israelite, he would still be an Israelite even if he's 99% his autosomal DNA is
He would never be 99% European.
And let me say why, though, because you're talking about you're always 50% of what your father is. But the thing is, if your father is only 50% indicative of a population, then you're going to be half of that. 50% of 50% is 25%. And then when you go another generation, 50% of 25% is going to be somewhere between 12 and 13%. And then from there, it's going to drop to somewhere 6 or 7%. Then 3%. You know, that's why in second generations, it's 99% indicative of another population.
The son gets part of his mom's X chromosome, right, and part of his father's mom's X chromosome. So you have that dilution, that breakdown, that 25%, like you were saying. But when it comes to the father's DNA, under your scenario, it has always been a descendant of Jacob's son. So you're not getting that 25%.
Hold on a minute, bro. I want to ask him a question. So Tay, you saying you see the screen? He said so you could dilute color. The color could change. They can look almost European, but the DNA isn't changing.
You have albino Negroes 100% African, and they 100% white. They got blonde hair. Their DNA is 100% African, matching their tribe, right? So skin color is not the issue.
So it ain't no skin doctor whatsoever.
No, this is just who is the look, Berean. Do you have children?
Yes.
Okay, your children. Do you expect your children not to look like you?
No.
Simple as that. Let's say Berean is Jacob. Berean had a son. His son had a son. Down the line, his DNA will always match back to Berean. Period.
This is, by the way, this is what I would say. What's changing, the paternal line is going to remain the same. That Y haplogroup, unless there's a mutation, that's going to remain the same. What's changing is the autosomal DNA. So yeah, you'll be 50% of what your father is, but you're only 25% of what your grandfather was. You're only 12 or so % of what your great-grandfather was. And that's why autosomal DNA does not tell us about paternal descent on the scale of millennia, because even within 7 generations, you get a situation where a person can come from a paternal line, but is 99% indicative of another.
I tend to disagree with you on that, but I would say, let's if we can get a geneticist on here, that would be helpful.
Yes.
What's up, brother 49?
Well, a geneticist will tell you exactly what Boo just reiterated to you. He's absolutely correct.
Pull the paper then. Pull the paper.
I can easily do that, but
okay, that was enjoyable the way that ended, because I remember, at that time, for those who don't know, the gentleman who joined the panel at the end is Yeshub from the Yap Gang. At that time, Yeshub was a champion in the eyes of that crowd of the Teo twins and Sister E and others in those spectrums. They were fans of his, as I'm a fan of his, so no shame in that. But when he dared to disagree with the sacred Teo twins, in their depictions of him, he went from being their champion to being, all of a sudden he's wicked, he's a witless crayfish, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you could see the moment where his heart turns right in. You can hear it in the tone of his voice, where he's like, "Oh, what's up, brother 49er?" And then when he says, "Oh, that he agrees with me," he's, "Oh, we'll pull the papers then."
Yep.
Changed on a dime. That was the moment you capture in time. The moment we made that shift in their heart.
That's good. That's good. I do want to say though, I find it fascinating, right? The thought process of the Teo twins. In fact, as you recall, I had a conversation with one of the Teo twins back in 2019 on Sister Cherry's channel, and I recall that back then, the sort of foggy reasoning that they have now was in place then. And if we just could very briefly, why do you think that is? Do you think that there was a shift from when they found out their paternal DNA to this sort of uneasiness and fogginess now? Do you think it's being done willfully? Do you think the methodological approach that they're taking now is precisely because of their own paternal DNA marker not coming up?
100%. As I was saying, so the steps, I would put the steps like this. Step 1, and this step, I'm getting this from Orthodox Moore, and because he filled in the blanks here for me. Step one, they're under the influence of Stephen Darby. They believe that all African Americans have E1B1A, and they also hold to the idea that you define an Israelite patrilineally, right? An Israelite is someone who descends paternally from Jacob. Step two, they take a DNA test. They find out that their haplogroup is G. That's curious. They start to discuss it with people. They realize the implications. It's a problem. They still hold on to a paternal definition of Israelite, but now they want to get rid of this whole idea of E1B1A being the necessary marker for an Israelite, because obviously that doesn't work out for them. And that's when, 93 mentioned in the chat that there's quote unquote white people with E1B1A. The Teo twins themselves would bring that up as a rhetorical device against those Israelites who would say that E1B1A is the Israelite marker. They would say things like, well, there's white boys with, 95% European, and they got E1B1A is their haplogroup, so that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. They wanted to make it a morphological argument, right? And they would even admit, yeah, maybe that person has Israelite in their ancestry, but it doesn't make any sense. So they they had jettisoned E1B1A as Israelite marker, and they jettisoned haplogroups. But at that point, they were still holding on to a paternal definition of Israelite, and they were trying to say, well, you're always going to be 50% of what your father is. And they confuse that as meaning, therefore, a paternal descendant of Jacob will be 50% autosomally similar to Jacob, which is preposterous. But nonetheless, that was that was the logic of their attempt to say, all right, forget about haplogroups. Let's determine paternal lines autosomally, because you got to be at least 50%, of your autosomally similar to your progenitor, your paternal progenitor, which is ridiculous. And if that only applies to one generation back, not millennia ago.
Now, if we can show in November 2021 something that was said about the lembas. Actually, let me pull it up. Let me actually pull it up on my end.
Yeah, this is fascinating. The Teo twins, Benaiah Israel, Kelly Richardson, they all like to appeal to the lemba without understanding what's going on. They're
exactly
confused about what's going on. But this is incredible, because this shows that Jacobo was thinking about, he was flirting with the idea of denying his G haplogroup. That's what this captures, So if you can read the highlighted portion.
So, do you mind if I?
Sure, you can read the whole thing if you want.
Oh, okay. Well, actually, I'll read just the highlighted portion.
Whatever, it's whatever you want. It's fine. It's the highlighted.
How can I have How can I have a haplogroup of G and still be related autosomally to lemba? Haplogroup and autosomes should align.
So,
wait, if I can read just a little bit more, because they might accuse.
Sure, no, you read the whole thing if you want.
Haplogroup are really only good for migration patterns, or I guess he meant patterns, if that. Some of the samples taken for some haplogroups in Africa are as low as 4 people. Some tribes in Africa have not been tested. There are Black Moroccan Jews with haplogroup G. Like I stated, it's all BS. All right.
See that? He's trying to trash DNA. He's trying to trash his own haplogroup. He's the highlighted portion. He's insinuating that maybe I'm not G. Maybe it's a mistake, right? But what's also shows how unfamiliar they are with DNA, right?
Yes.
If they're going to say, how can I have haplogroup G and still be autosomally related to the lemba? First off, he hasn't shown any autosomal relation to the lemba. What he's basing that on is GEDmatch Oracle, right?
Yeah.
Oracle does this thing where it'll have these categories, and as I understand it, you might be uploading some videos on GEDmatch Oracle in the future.
Precisely.
Okay, good.
That is going to deal
those videos might
directly with. Yeah, if I just could, just so the audience can hear it. I'm going to upload some videos by my good friend Abu dealing with GEDmatch and why this appeal to Oracle is a fundamentally flawed argument made by Hebrew Israelites. And the reason why is because you do have certain proponents like We Woke Now, Teo, and several others who like to make, Sister E and others who like to make appeals to the calculator. But my friend Abu actually explored let's just say the flawed methodological approach by making an appeal to such calculators. And as people will see when the videos are uploaded, they'll see just how bad the GEDmatch argument actually is.
The appeal to GEDmatch Oracle. And the reason why is because GEDmatch Oracle, it's a great tool. It's a very fun tool, but it is not measuring shared DNA when you go into Oracle specifically. Correct. What Oracle does is you use a certain calculator and you'll be measured across very broad categories at some point. It'll be like North African, European, Sub-Saharan African. These are really broad categories. And then it'll have samples that are measured over those broad categories as well. And then it'll show how you what's your mathematical proximity to how they measured across those samples? So, for example, the example I love to give is I'm not Italian, right? I don't have any Italian ancestry. Italian does not come up in any of my DNA results, right? But in Oracle, I can get hits for Italian, and the reason why is because I have a large amount of European admixture and a smaller amount of North African admixture because my paternal line came out of Morocco, right? Well, many Italians likewise have a large amount of European admixture and then a smaller amount of North African admixture.
Right.
So the reason why I get Italian is in these proximity calculators is because both of us are scoring similarly, the Italian samples and myself, on these very broad categories of European and North African and maybe West Asian, I think was another one, right? But it doesn't, GEDmatch is clear that Oracle does not measure shared DNA. It's not saying you actually descend from these populations. So if you're relying on an Oracle result, you're not demonstrating that you descend from a population listed in an Oracle result. And the Teo twins never understood that, but they were all excited about getting Lemba in Oracle. But the thing is, any African-American is going to get Lemba in Oracle. Anyone who has a significant portion of sub-Saharan African DNA is going to get Lemba. There's a guy named, I think it's Zongo Mosi. He said the whole of Africa is Lemba then. You know, if you're going to play this game, right?
Yeah.
Because they're just measuring a percentage of sub-Saharan African DNA in general, right? And so that's number one. Number two, the excitement over the Lemba, because they're excited about mainstream excitement over the Lemba, right? But the mainstream excitement over the Lemba has nothing to do with their autosomal DNA. It has to do with their paternal lines. And the second thing to bring up is
and more explicitly, for the Buba clan, the 55% of them, the Cohen modal haplotype, which is J1.
The 6STR, the old definition of the modal haplotype, Cohen modal haplotype, which was associated with the haplogroup J1. But that's another thing is, so that's bad enough that he doesn't understand that nobody's excited. Nobody in the mainstream is excited about Lemba autosomal DNA. They're excited about their ability, some of them, to show that they have the Cohen modal haplotype, right? Which is relates to a paternal line, right?
Correct.
And it shows that some Lemba and some mainstream Jews, some Ashkenazim, some Sephardim, do have a common paternal ancestor, irrespective of their autosomal differences, irrespective of the differences in their outward appearance. And that's why there's excitement about the Lemba, because then it seems to put their traditions and their claims about their own history in a new light, right?
Correct.
But the other thing to keep in mind is he said in that shot that you showed, he was like, autosomes and haplogroups should align, which also shows that he doesn't know what he's talking about, because the Lemba themselves are diverse patrilineally. They have a bunch of different haplogroups, like most groups in the world, just like Ashkenazi Jews. The Lemba are very diverse patrilineally. They have a whole bunch of different haplogroups. They have T, they have different subclades of E, different subclades of J. They even have a little R, if I'm not mistaken. So,
and if I could just
show that Yacoba didn't know what he's talking about, despite him spending years telling other people that they don't know what they're talking about.
If I just could, so we can segue to this clip that I'm about to play. The other thing is that relevant to the Cohen modal haplotype, there was a paper that was produced a few years back that seemed to revisit the topic. And so it seems to be the case that at the very least, the geneticists are kind of moving away from,
I'll say that was we could touch on that briefly. What I would say is that they gave a new definition for Cohen modal haplotype. There was the 6STR Cohen modal haplotype, and now there's like a 12-point definition.
Right.
Under the 12-point definition, none of the Lemba fit that. None of them had that definition of the Cohen modal haplotype.
Correct.
However, as one geneticist had pointed out, because there's the different geneticists who appeal to that had different datings for when exactly the ancestor of the 12-point definition existed. And one geneticist pointed out that ancestor probably lived in the 10th century. So saying that the Lemba don't share a 10th century common ancestor, 10th century common era, common paternal ancestor with Ashkenazim and Sephardim really isn't that big of a deal. It's the 6-point Cohen modal haplotype, which implied that they might have a common ancestor who lived 3,000 years ago rather than 1,000.
And there was also the appeal to groups of Arabs that also have the Cohen modal haplotype.
Yeah, of course. And that's entirely plausible. What I would say is that even without the Cohen modal haplotype, the diversity of the Lemba is similar to the diversity, the paternal diversity we see amongst Ashkenazim and
right.
and Sephardim. And so what I would say is that a Lemba with J1 is closer to an Ashkenazi with J1 than either of them are to a Lemba or an Ashkenazi with E1B1B.
Or how about this? A Lemba with J1 is closer to an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic Jew than either of the Teo twins are. That have the in other words, a Lemba with the Cohen modal haplotype is closer to an Ashkenazi and a Sephardic Jew with the Cohen modal haplotype than either of the Teo twins are to said Lembas that have the Cohen modal haplotype.
Yeah. And what also I would say is that Lemba and Ashkenazim who have J1 are closer to each other paternally than they are to members of their respective groups who don't have J1. And then aside from that, Lemba who have E1B1B are closer to Ashkenazim who have E1B than either of them are to members of their respective groups who don't have E1B1B.
Correct.
So there's like different lines within the Ashkenazim and within the Lemba that are closer to each other than they are to their, like, you know, the people who are there within their autosomal proximity.
Correct.
And that's something the Teo twins didn't understand.
Yeah. Now, if we could go ahead and play this relevant clip, could you guys give people a very brief, like maybe 30-second? Yeah.
So what we're going to discuss here is their inconsistent approach to autosomal DNA, morphology, national identity. What the background to this is, as we covered earlier, they coming out of, you know, an influence of Darby, they were originally held to a patrilineal definition. We even showed a screenshot and when they were still insisting on a patrilineal definition. They've dropped that now. Now they talk about how your paternal line can be washed out, right? Quote unquote washed out. That if your paternal line mixes with too many non-Israelite women, at a certain point, you cease to be an Israelite. So on their model now, you can basically have non-Israelite paternal descendants of Jacob. Let me say that again. Non-Israelite patrilineal descendants of Jacob, people who descend patrilineally from Jacob who are non-Israelites. You can have that now on the Teo twins model, right? So they've totally abandoned a patrilineal definition of Israelite, and they use that to maintain their sort of skin doctrine, where you're going to define Israelites based on their outward appearance, right? And so they basically have adopted this position so that way the Israelites can be restricted to being quote unquote black. And to restrict the idea of white Israelites, right? That's the general theme here. But what we're going to see in this clip is, you know, because they keep changing their position from moment to moment, because their methodology is so incoherent, they still believe you can have black Edomites and white Edomites, right? You can't have white Israelites, but you can somehow have white Edomites as well as black Edomites. So listen to this.
See, some people tell you Esau is not the white man because the white man is white, and Esau was black because Israel is black. But the world is more complex than that. Personally, I think you still have some black Edomites. I do. I think they're right there in Africa. I think some of them are called Esan. That's my opinion. Esau, Esan. I think, you know, they are the Edo people, Edomites, right? Edo. That's just my opinion. I think some of them are. But I don't think they're like some of their cousins. That's just my opinion. I think the other half of the Edomites, which is, you know, the white man who's, some of them, not all of them, who interfaced or mingled with the nations, right? Some of the Edomites mingled with some of the nations, and we're going to talk about that.
All right. So basically what he was saying, notice he said there are still black Edomites. So what he's saying is that he feels that just like Jacob was quote unquote black, therefore Esau, who was autosomally identical, was also quote unquote black, and therefore the earliest Edomites were, on his view, quote unquote black, right? So his view is, he says there's still black Edomites, like the Edo tribe in, you know, in West Africa. He feels these are like, you know, Edomites who are indicative of what the original Edomite population
and basing it on a false equivalence in terms of sounding, you know, like
that, and apparently the Edo like to wear a lot of red, so they're excited about that. But yeah, the thing is, but whatever the case, so his position is that there's still black Edomites, but there are also white Edomites in Europe because the Edomites mixed into the European population. Now, but the issue here is that they deny the possibility of white Israelites. So if your autosomal DNA and outward appearance becomes too different, you cease to be an Israelite. For them, you know, your national identity is based on your autosomal DNA and your outward appearance. But somehow that doesn't apply to the Edomites. All of a sudden they have a different position. You can have black Edomites, you can have white Edomites, you know, Edomites with drastically different autosomal DNA. So even though they weren't aware of it, they were undermining their own appeals to this idea of defining people autosomally.
Correct. Yeah. Just absolutely positively just lacking in any sort of
They're completely inconsistent, and it's because they just do this wild sort of arm flailing all the time. And, there's a member of the Yap Gang, a gentleman named Rue, because they called him an Edomite, and he's African American.
Yeah.
They called him. I mean, it's
so if we just could, just so we can segue to the next portion.
Sure.
I think it's absolutely ridiculous to sit here and make it's essentially special pleading. So they create a special rule where they want to determine Edomite lineage, and it's okay for them to intermix, so they can call them white Edomites. But if it's a person who they assume is an Israelite, right? It has to be autosomally. Basically, the majority of your genetic makeup has to be sub-Saharan African.
Yeah.
Or
does your
or
autosomal DNA determine your nationality or not?
Or here's the thing: the idea is when they're asked on how they determine it, like what percentage is it, 10, 20, 30, 100, I mean, well, whatever, like 100% of your autosomal, 60%, like do you have to be by majority sub-Saharan African? Do you have what if you're like 30% sub-Saharan African, but you're somebody that they're sympathetic to?
When they were on Orthodox Moore's channel, he asked them that question, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know what the number would be." But you did see in the clip, and also in the screenshot you showed that they were basically insinuating it has to be at least 50%, because on their ridiculous model, you're always 50% of your paternal progenitor. No matter how many generations back, even if it's 3,000, 4,000 years ago.
I think my friend 93 is going to laugh at this joke, because Kevin Samuel used to use this term. Kevin Samuel was a guy in the manosphere. He used to say adjustable 6. So what is this, like adjustable Israelite? Like you're like adjustable Israelites. Yeah. Depending on who they talk to.
Adjustable. They make changes constantly on the fly.
Yeah. Like you get like, you can be less than 50% if they find you, I guess endearing to their doctrine. But anyways, if we can, let's go to the
to our good friend, the good doctor.
Oh yeah,
the fourth and final section, last but not
quote
least,
unquote doctor. Yeah,
yes.
quote unquote doctor. Correct. As much of a doctor as Doctor Who. All right. Anyways.
Well.
All right. So, could you give people an introduction to this so they can?
Okay.
Understand?
Yeah. Well, actually, do you want to show the screenshot also?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Skipping ahead there a little bit.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's just to set it up, just to show that he's done this multiple times.
Okay. All right. Which screenshot?
It's titled Kelly-Blood-Cleanse-OCT 2022.
Let's see.
Yeah, quite the title, huh? Quite the file name.
October 2022, correct?
Yep. This is a post from October of 2022. Our good friend, the good doctor who runs the We Woke Now channel, put up a Facebook post in which he...
Man, I feel like it's taking me a second to maneuver around this thing. It almost feels like I've been gone for about 6 months or so.
Yeah, maybe. 93. Now that I'm 93. Put Mandingos.
Mandingos.
Yeah, when we were reading Francis Moore, when he was reading Francis Moore, and said the Mandingos. I honestly, with all due respect to our gentle-hearted friend, the good doctor, I've been tempted to do a show where we do like a reading comprehension with with the good doctor, where we go over like various sources that he clearly misread. Right. And I don't mean in Hebrew. I'm talking about sources in English, but whatever the case.
Yeah.
So you have it on your screen. This is a Facebook post by the good doctor, and he's quoting Joel, the end of Joel 3, right? And in the King James translation, it says, I will cleanse their blood that I have not cleansed. And then he puts #blood transfusion.
Okay.
So that's that helps to set up the clip.
And for the record, for people who may not know, he also employs Lashawan Quadash, even though he's not.
Hence his rendering of the Tetragrammaton there.
Right. So just for the record, he's not a member of a One West Hebrew Israelite camp. However, he has adopted their phonetic in terms of the dialect,
including the Taza, and including even Aria's diacritics. Like he pretends like he has I don't even know where you got that from, but he uses their Aria's diacritics. Ridiculous. I'll touch on that in a future video.
Absolutely,
God willing.
Yes.
But so that's an example of him saying that Joel 3, the end of Joel 3 refers to a quote unquote blood transfusion, cleansing the blood. He thinks this is relevant to DNA. So the clip you're about to show is going to also have him discussing that. So you can go ahead. It's only about a minute long.
See, family, one thing I stand on all the word. See, even with our DNA, let's just say some of us may feel like you got mixture in your family. But the Most High said he was going to clean up the DNA of Judah, of all his people. That's Joel chapter 3. The last verse makes it clear. You see the blood transfusion right there. He said that he will cleanse the blood of Judah. And because how in the world am I sitting at 94.5%, as the category will be African. Right. And he said the average is like 73 to 79%. And after all what our ancestors had gone through, how in the world my DNA is the results that it is, yours the DNA that it is, and our people right across the board. So don't get intimidated by the DNA stuff. The Most High made it clear he's going to cleanse our blood. And just like whatever test that they tried to come up with to try to minimize, for example, the limba, every time they made their adjustments, the numbers went up versus reducing, declining. Yeah. So every time we got asked to show proof, and I've done multiple DNA tests, right? I wasn't even thinking about doing a DNA test because that's my family tradition of being Israel. But since the naysayers asked, so didn't do just one, did multiple, and all of them confirmed. So don't get discouraged. And as we see, the Igbos, they're confirmed anyway. Yeah. Right. So this is old here, but just want to give you an understanding of, the powers that be, so to speak, that's asking all these questions. Guess what? Many of them already have a way of trying to manipulate the results. Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot there. First, if I can say something about Joel 3:21, right? The use of the verb cleanse, that's a King James rendering. So yeah. It's worth noting that how the King James translators understood the verb cleanse in the 19th Psalm. Like, for example, the exact same verb is used in Psalm 19:12.
If I could pull that up, for the audience so they can get a visual.
Let's look at Psalm 19:12 and Psalm 19:13 and compare them to Joel 3:21.
Yeah, hold up. Give me a moment. Let me just pull this up on mine. You said Psalm 19 and 12, correct?
Yeah, and as well as the 13 first. We'll look at 12 and then 13, and maybe switch back from 13 to 12.
Yeah.
But yeah, Psalm 19.
And would you prefer that I post the interlinear?
Yeah, that might work better. Yeah, because that way we could talk about the verb.
Yeah, let me actually do this real quick. Just give me a moment.
No problem.
All right. So
and also we'll look at Joel 3:21.
Wow. So based on their misreading of the King James, it seems. Why am I not surprised?
I mean, the interpretation is clearly based on a specific verse of the King James, but even the King James, I don't think the King James made a mistake. They may be just using cleanse in a different sense, but it's they're interpreting the interpretation. But the King James itself provides an example of how you can understand how else that verb can be understood.
Yeah, the King James. Here we go. It says, "Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults." Huh? Yep.
So what do you think that means? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. It's I would say that's referring to sort of cleansing in a guilt sense. I mean, it could take it away, but also there's a level of acquitting. That's what it's talking about.
Yeah. Yep. You could look at it right here. Let's see. Look at the relevant usage. Here we go.
But the main point is that,
well, even in okay, hold on, go ahead, keep going. I'm listening.
Okay, so when you look at the Hebrew text of Psalm 19:12, right?
Yeah.
This idea of cleanse me, it's the verb nakeni, right? It's the
right.
And so he's saying cleanse me
in the Pille stem, right?
Yes, it's in the Pille stem. Yeah.
Yep.
So now in Joel 3:21, it's also in the Pille, right? But it's just first person, and basically talking about what I've cleansed or what I will cleanse and so on,
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's also in the PL. So it's this verb, from this root in the PL stem, right? So the root is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a nun kof hey. Some dictionaries might have nun kof yod, right? But whatever the case, nun kof is the first two root letters, and then the third root letter is a weaker root letter, hey or yod, depending on what dictionary you look at. But whatever the case, it's the same verb in the same verb stem, right?
Yeah. And right here, as you can see right here, acquitted is one of the relevant definitions.
Now, he might not like that. He was, that's the dictionary's wrong. So I was wondering if you could go to Psalm 19:13. It's the very next verse.
I was in 13 just a moment ago.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must have missed it. I know you were in 12.
Yeah, here we go. Oops.
Now, admittedly, it's in the nifal, but whatever the case, it's, the two are related. It's still the same verb root. So essentially the same verb, just a different verb stem.
Yeah.
But how does the King James render it? I don't have the King James.
Yep. So I have it right here. Hold up. Let me just go to the King James. So you said the 13th verse, and we'll scroll down. For some reason, this thing just locked up on me. I don't know what just happened there. Okay. Oh, okay. Here we go. 13th. Here we go. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent.
There you go.
From great transgression. Innocent.
So even the King James translators that it recognizes a sense of acquittal, right? So
acquittal.
So the PL would just be like to make you innocent, hence to acquit you, right?
Yeah.
And so because that's the nifal, it's the passive. It says I will be innocent, right?
Right.
So now if we can go to Joel 3:21, that's the verb that's used.
And
in Joel
just to point out, I shall be innocent. There we go. Right. But nevertheless, the same root is utilized to indicate the
yeah. So it's basically in the passive, right? So the nifal is the passive, right?
Yes.
So the PL is sort of like more of a causative. It's they're going to make you innocent in the sense, hence why it's used in the sense of acquitting.
Right. Actually, if I could do something real quick before you even we go and move on from this, if just give me a moment. Of course, you know what they're going to try to do, okay? Because I'm just going to point this out now. Let me just point this out real quick.
Now, this is a minor point. We don't have to dwell on it too much, but my point is that the verb, the text in Joel can be understood as like acquitting people, making them innocent of blood.
Yeah.
Right. But Kelly jumps right away to this idea of, it means that he's going to cleanse your blood in the sense of a blood transfusion and fixing your DNA. So that's why he's saying, subscribers, family members, family, friends, whatever he said, don't get intimidated by the DNA debate because the Most High is going to cleanse our blood. He's basically saying, like, if you can find something in your DNA that isn't working out for the stories that we're telling you, don't worry, the Most High is going to cleanse your blood anyway, right? Which it's such a
cheap argument,
straining interpretation of Joel,
very cheap argumentation, right? Like
almost.
almost
That's a minor point. There's other things I want to unpack from what he said in that clip, though.
Yeah,
if I may, unless you have something else to share on that.
Yeah, just very briefly, if I could.
Yeah, no problem.
If I could point this out, all we have to do is just go to a different translation. I mean,
yes,
we're not,
of course, but
we're not relegated to
the King James renders it because he might say, "Oh, well, they're all corrupted." Any
except for the King James that was made by a non-Israelite, presumably non-Israelite.
Mm-hmm.
Especially what we know about King James genetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go. Oops, let me actually do this. Hold up, give me a second, and then we can move on. Just briefly, let me just do this real quick. I just wanted to point out the relevant translation. It says, "Shall I leave their innocent blood unavenged? No, I will not. The Lord dwells in Zion." Right? The ESV, "I will avenge their blood. Blood I have not avenged, for the Lord dwells in Zion." Right? So they take cleanse there to, the word cleanse is meaning like to avenge, or perhaps even to pardon, like it says in the Christian Standard. I will pardon their blood guilt. Right? I will pardon, as it also reads in the American Standard. The Breton Septuagint reads, "I will make inquisition for their blood." Right? The Dewey Rheims, "I will cleanse," but again, cleanse there could be meaning something like not blood transfusion, but rather, as the International Standard Version reads, "I will acquit their blood guilt." So there you have it. Just pointing out some
certainly.
examples.
Yeah, it shows that there's other views available, but somehow, based on an uncareful reading of a 17th century Anglican translation, he's assuming it means, the God's going to fix your DNA. He's going to give you a blood transfusion. I guess he thinks he's going to filter out the impurities and, put in some pure Israelite blood. Which also begs the question: who exactly is going to get this blood transfusion, and how do you determine who's
exactly
who's eligible?
Good point. Very good point. Well,
But, oh, well.
if the line of reasoning that these guys employ is indicative of anything, I think it would probably be more than likely some sort of morphological argument or something like that, something absurd. But anyways, if we could move on, because we're winding down. We're winding down right now.
Yeah.
So he thought it was blood transfusion. And what's ironic is that none of the definitions is indicating I will change your blood, right? He takes cleanse to be like, oh, like your blood has been like it's like your biology, your genetics have been tainted, so I'm gonna fix your genetics, ridiculous. But anyways, so you wanted to bring up
some other things in that, like a very, very quickly, another thing that was interesting in there, because I think it sort of hints at his reasoning. He was asking rhetorically, how could he and other people possibly have the percentage of African DNA that they had? And then he says, in light of, quote, all that our people went through, end quote.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't elaborate on that, but I think that's already weird. Like, he's asking these weird questions, like, in light of all we went through, how could I be 90% sub-Saharan African and others be 70 to 80%? Whatever that means. Like, it just shows, even though it's unclear what he has in mind, it already starts to hint at this sort of weird reasoning that he has. But the problem is, Kelly blocks almost anyone who questions him, and as a result, his thought process winds up remaining really foggy. You see, because, in an echo chamber, there's no mechanism to help him sharpen his reasoning, so he just sort of feeds this like really foggy reasoning to his followers. So that was a minor point, but there's a couple other things I'd like to point out, if that's okay.
Yeah. And matter of fact, do you mind if we just go through them a little briefly, and then perhaps bring out another piece of evidence? So I think it's salient to point out that he makes these vague allusions to the lembas, being tested, and their numbers are going up. So every time they're retested, it's completely vague. But I don't think he has any idea what he's referring to. He's repeating a vague story, which the Lemba elder known as what's the
Kohen Hamendishe,
that he had said, or something to that effect. And then again, Kelly can't be questioned in the echo chamber and can't be bothered to clarify what he's saying. So it's just vaguely reassuring public theater for the confirmation bias of those inside of the bubble, like basically
the
those
faithful,
who are
the faithful followers of his that are faithful. Exactly.
Not this faithful, but those,
not you, others. It's funny that he because the thing is, so Kohen Hamendishe is this Lemba elder, and no disrespect to that gentleman, I don't intend any disrespect towards him, but he has told a story which is somewhat vague, and he himself may not be sure what he's referring to, but he claims that there was a certain test that the Kohen Hamendishe took, and he got a certain percentage of something. He doesn't say what it is, but it was higher than a lot of Jews had, right? That's the way he vaguely recalls it, right? He was tested for something, and he had more of that thing than mainstream Jews do, and maybe he had tested again and he got a higher number, right? Completely vague. And no disrespect to him, he may have been working on a foggy memory of like a conversation that he had in passing with someone like Parfit, Tudor Parfit, right? So no shame in that. But Kelly Richardson and others have tried to run with this vague story, and they don't even understand what they're referring to. But they'll just say, oh, the Lemba got tested and they tried to change the test, and guess what? They still got higher. Now, of course, this begs the question, higher at what? Like, what exactly are you referring to? But Kelly doesn't know. He's just repeating somebody else's vague story. And you can't even question him because he hides behind the block wall and he blocks anyone who questions him, And that's, like you said, and like I said before, when you're in an echo chamber, there's no mechanism to help you, refine your arguments because you can't be questioned,
Right. And also the vague allusions to Igbo DNA. He made vague allusions. In fact, because I'm skipping ahead slightly, can we actually go to that? There's a wall post that he had on his channel, on his YouTube channel. Can we actually get into that?
Okay.
I think.
Oh yeah. Actually, that's good. Yeah.
So let's actually get into that if we could. So this is the
you're good. Yeah, because this will tie in with the Lemba thing and the Igbo thing.
Yeah. Let me actually hold on because I have several windows open. I'm just trying to shorten the amount of windows that I have. All right, I can find it. Yeah, for some reason now I can't find it. Hold on, let me do it this way. Yep, here we go. Oh no, I still.
We're going to be showing a community post, I think, from last October.
Yeah, there it is. There it is. For some reason, it wasn't showing up on mine.
Okay.
All right. Hopefully, it shows up now. All right. Here we go.
Does it have a month limit on it? What does it say?
Yeah, 4 months ago. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So this is like from October.
So it reads: if you have done your DNA on 23andMe and you see Igbo in your results, or if you see Igbo, Lemba, Yoruba, or other groups who have been confirmed to be connected to Israel, according to the legal system in this country, you are Jewish. The Obadiah Alliance just recently confirmed the Igbo to be descendants of Israel. It's time for us to put pressure on the judicial system to take action against those who are in violation of crossing the line of the hate crime laws, all in the name of Christianity. Oh, goodness.
There's so much to unpack there.
Wait. So-called Christian. I got to read it away. So-called Christian groups have taken biblical transliterated labels such as Israelite, quote unquote, and quote unquote Hebrew Israelite, and use them in order of slander. Lastly, you don't have to have a DNA test to be included. Wait, what? If you've been subjected, keep in mind he had 2 F's there, subjected to any ridicule such as harassment, intimidation, and etc., email me. Please email me, and there he provides his email. Hate crime laws, and then
he quotes some law,
yeah, some law.
Then he shows his autosomal admixture.
33.5%.
If you can go to the next image, you should be able to click to another image.
Another image?
Yeah, scroll back up a little bit. There's a way to like go to the right on the images. There should be a little arrow there. Yeah, you see it right in the center of the image on the right.
There it is, right there. Yeah,
yeah. And then he shows. I think this is from maybe
your
My
closest
Heritage,
genetic. Yeah, and then so he has Lemba #1, Bantu, Mandinka, Bantu.
I think Moore might be able to clarify this. I think he's using either My True DNA or My Heritage, where they basically use Oracle. They're using the Oracle platform, and maybe running different samples through it. But he's excited about the fact that he got Lemba, through a platform that's basically using Oracle. That's definitely Oracle on the screen there.
Yeah.
He's got Lemba derived, So what's going on here? There's so much to unpack there. First off, what his logic is here. Now, man, there's so much to say. He recently said he balked at people claiming that IUIC is a hate group, and I'm fine with that. In a vacuum, I'm fine with that, right? But he said, "Oh, they're not a hate group because they didn't kill anyone," right? But yet in that post, he was insinuating that people have committed hate crimes against him by criticizing him.
Yeah,
and by crossing the line. Remember a while back he was. Oh, I'm sorry. What's it say? Says this is sad because Remy literally explained that the Obadiah Alliance ruling would not apply to African Americans unless they reconnect through the Igbo. Exactly.
This is fascinating to see his shaky line of reasoning at work, man.
On so many levels. But yeah, so he basically what he was arguing in that post is that if you're connected to the Lemba or the Igbo, then you should somehow have some special protections from criticism, that we should bring the judicial branch down upon the heads of his critics, basically. Right. And it's so preposterous. The Lemba thing, this applies to the same thing that we said with the Teo twins. They think they got something significant about Lemba, but they're basing it on Oracle, which doesn't measure shared DNA,
Yeah. And real quick, just because I think we're going to miss this point that was mentioned earlier. Now, I get if you want to finish that thought, you can, but I think we should mention the part about the Obadiah Alliance, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, let's get into that next. Yeah, go right to it. You can go to it now.
Okay. Yeah. What I'm thinking is, so based on what we see in that community post, he seems to think that the Obadiah Alliance recognizing the Igbo means he himself is legally Jewish because he has Igbo DNA.
Exactly.
But the author, the
Yehonatan Elazar de Mota, Rabbi de Mota.
Right, Rabbi de Mota, in his Pesach Din said that many African Americans with partial Igbo DNA would have to convert. So,
and can we address that real quick? Can I say one thing about that?
Sure, absolutely.
What I wanted to say about that, because a number of Israelites got scandalized by that. Like, oh, how are you going to say the Igbo are Israelites? You're going to recognize the Igbo as Israelites, but then you're going to say that African Americans who have Igbo DNA have to convert. How are you going to say that? What he said is that if they have their maternal line goes back to the Igbo and they can prove it, they won't have to, but otherwise they have to convert. Here's an analogy. Rabbi de Mota recognizes millions of Ashkenazim as part of Israel as well, right? But that doesn't mean that anyone who gets 33% Ashkenazi and let's say 23andMe in a DNA test is automatically halachically Jewish, right?
Right.
Because what if, like, say your father's father was an Ashkenazi? Not you, but I'm saying there's a guy out there. He finds out his father's father was Ashkenazi, so he has 23andMe will say, oh, you're 25% Ashkenazi Jewish. But guess what? His mother's line wasn't, so he's not halachically Jewish. So just showing even, Rabbi Demota as being fair, even if you recognize millions of Ashkenazim as members of Israel, that still doesn't mean anyone with Ashkenazi DNA automatically fits the halachic definition. And the same thing applies to the Igbo. And the funny thing is that Rabbi Demota, when he was interviewed by Garfield, I invite people to watch Garfield's interview with him. Rabbi Demota would say, he would repeatedly say, if we start with the premise that the Igbo are Israelites. It was very interesting that he qualified it like that. And then he said, if you start with that premise, nonetheless, those African Americans who have some Igbo DNA but cannot demonstrate that they descend from them maternally would still have to undergo a conversion, on his view, on a rabbinic view. And it's interesting that they'll appeal to this rabbinic ruling, but then all of a sudden they want to throw the rabbinic logic out the window if it doesn't work.
Exactly.
They're like, oh, maternal, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But even on the paternal definition, like even if we held to a paternal definition, you getting a percentage of something doesn't mean you descend from that population paternally. Like, for example, I get Filipino DNA in my, my DNA test because, my paternal line cut through the Philippines. But it's not like my strict paternal line. It's my great-grandfather married a Filipino woman, and that's how I pick up this Filipino DNA, Right. So, even if we hold to a paternal definition, I can have Filipino DNA without being patrilineally Filipino or whatever.
So real quick, because to wind down, I think,
yes, I'm sorry.
Beyond that, beyond he seems to think that the judicial system,
the quote unquote judicial system,
should protect those who got lemba in Jedmatch from criticism or scrutiny. It's the height of absurdity.
It really is. It really is. I mean, that's exactly what he's insinuating. Like, did you get lemba in Jedmatch Oracle? Well, then the judicial system should be punishing our critics. It's like, come on.
The absolute absurdity.
It's just the bizarre and hilarious public theater that goes on in the echo chamber that is the We Woke Now channel,
But to kind of wrap up, to kind of summarize everything, because we looked at Divine Prospect, his unfamiliarity with DNA, he doesn't seem to understand how it works.
What I would say is ultimately Divine Prospect, we invite
hold on one second.
Sorry.
So if I could, to summarize for everything, Divine doesn't seem to understand how DNA works, especially when he's saying markers, plural, and then he's talking about, and then he's switching from what seems to be switching from paternal to maternal, and initially starting off with making an argument for maternity, then it becomes paternity, and then come to find out that you have people, several people who are saying that he told them that he was R1 or R, some subclade, maybe R1B, R1A, who knows. Nevertheless, I think I don't know. Maybe he can clarify for us there. As far as Ron Dalton is concerned, I think it's going to be much harder with him, given that you've attempted to try to find out what it is how he's, his methodology works, and given that he won't even share his own DNA results. And then,
well, I think the fact that he's saying it's none of your business, I think it's unlikely that he ever will be. Will honestly share it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And then as far as the Teo twins, their methodology is, again, it's almost very shaky. It's very it's like I don't know, like, and I think now they're going back to like, oh, who cares about DNA? It's all about the curses, and the curses,
whatever that means, right? Can I say something really quickly about the curses?
Sure.
So the thing is, it's one thing if you're, and now admittedly the One West position on Africans is ridiculous, but on a certain level, if you're going to identify people by the curses, then okay, I can understand, they're going to restrict Africans from from the African Americans access to the curses, right? And the reason why I say this is because if you take out the slavery on slave ships, right, being transported on slave ships, if you take that out, much of Deuteronomy 28 is referring to what many people experience dealing with raiding parties. You know, like all over the world, foreign armies were running through people's towns and snatching people up and taking their women and their kids and enslaving people, right? That was a common thing. So the slave ships becomes the unique thing. And that's why they try to, you know, connect. They interpret Deuteronomy 28:68 as referring to slave ships going to the Americas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's the thing. That becomes like the essential marker when people are trying to identify people by the curses. But the thing is, the Teo twins recognize all sorts of populations who are still in West Africa, like the Lemba are Israelites, the Igbos are Israelites, right, according to the Teo twins. But then that would mean that the transatlantic slave trade is not essential to the definition of Israelite then.
Yeah. And also, if I and obviously with our good friend, the quote unquote doctor. Can I say the unaccredited doctor? Is that possible to call him the unaccredited doctor at this point?
And if you want to, I mean, we'll just say the
unaccredited doctor.
Who am I?
Because I don't know if good would necessarily fit his approach to a lot of these conversations. But the alleged doctor, he I don't know. I find all of this reasoning from all of these guys to be a bit foggy, but you know, it'll be interesting how things move forward over time once they actually start to understand, I think, the topic a little better, and to be charitable, even to all of them, to be charitable. Once they start to understand it, I think they'll be able to understand why perhaps this live stream was being made, not in the sense to poke fun at them. It's not to poke fun at them. I think what we're laughing at more so than anything is just the and I'm not saying this about Divine because he hasn't been disrespectful, but at the very least,
he's a gentleman.
Right, exactly. But at the very least, to Dalton, to the Teo twins, and to Kelly, I think that their approach has been very uncharitable. I think their approach is very arrogant. They think they know more than they actually do. And I think that it would behoove them to just take a step back, re-examine their approach to these topics, you know, readjust their method and learn a proper methodology.
And that can happen through dialogue, through open dialogue. The problem is because they're so intent on protecting their brand, they blocked everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. What did he say? He said,
he said, so if going by the curses is the thing, according to Dante and the Teo twins are over, so how can you tell?
Right. Oh, that's another thing. Yeah, Dante is apparently saying that the curses ended at the end of the 400 years. If I'm not mistaken, he's literally said if someone says that African Americans are still cursed, he's a liar. Not that Dante's a liar. I'm saying Dante was saying that about other people.
Yeah. Then again, he has foggy reasoning as well. But nevertheless, I do want to say this though. I hope that the folks will take a step back and maybe kind of recalibrate, readjust their approaches. I think if a person is going to make an argument from the fashion that they are, because for us, for you and I who take an ecclesiastical definition of the covenant people of God, I think it's not problematic in any shape, form, or fashion because we're not hinging.
There's no shame in anyone having these haplogroups.
Yeah, and it's not hinging on any sort of geological tie-in to anyone else. It's simply, are you in the faith? Do you belong to the people of God covenantally as it pertains to the new covenant found in Jesus Christ? However, I think in the case of the aforementioned gentleman, and I'll say to maybe a lesser degree Divine, because I don't think he takes that sort of an approach.
I don't know his position.
His position is more so he doesn't take that sort of a position. So I don't want people to think I'm lumping him in. So I'll exclude him because I know his definition is radically different than the others in terms of how he determines, whatever. But it was simply just dealing with his methodology on DNA. But as far as the others, and even guys like Dante, while they'll claim salvation is for all, it's nevertheless the case that their emphasis is based on I think an unsound and maybe unhealthy reasoning and approach. I think they should probably all take a step back, the three men, Dalton, Teo, and Kelly, and probably readjust how they're approaching these topics. And maybe it'll help them be less foggy. Maybe they'll be much more conservative in how they go about presenting any sort of assumptions.
And they should be more open to dialogue and not create echo chambers. That's the other thing. That's why I was trying to emphasize that creating an echo chamber, you wind up having no mechanism for sharpening your reasoning because we're all fallible. We all make mistakes. We all have poor understandings of certain subjects we delve into. but we can, I always try to keep all the doors to dialogue open. I let all my critics, anyone who wants to object, to leave objections on my social media posts, whether it be videos or Facebook posts, whatever, because, I can benefit from correction. Unfortunately, the Teo twins and Kelly, they don't seem to believe that. They feel that every critic, every questioner has to be blocked, has to be kept out, because they're more interested in protecting their brand,
Right. Yeah.
And that's unfortunate.
Correct. Well, on that note, I think
Yep.
we're
Covered
done
it all.
here.
Fun show.
Yeah. I do want to leave everybody with one thing, and of course, I do want to say this right now. If anybody accuses us of this, none of us are attempting to make any sort of leaps in genealogy in terms of saying, well, in order for you to be, right with God, you have to be this or that, because that's not our, that's not our positions, that's not our perspective. Because some might watch this and wonder why we're focusing so much attention on this. You got to kind of mute there. You got to mute.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, no, I agree with you. We, as you said, we hold to an ecclesiastical definition of Israelite. So your genealogy does not matter.
Yeah, of course. And so if I could just momentarily, I think I'd like to point this out. And of course, if people wonder why we're getting into this topic, it's to explore the methodologies being utilized by those who are putting an unhealthy emphasis. And I'm not saying Divine is doing this, but I'm saying the others. His was more to do with just in terms of how is he gleaning his own, DNA. But with the others, it seems to be more nefarious, if that makes any sense. Even though they'll claim salvation for all, I think there's the reason why they want to angle for a particular Israelite, definition, and for particular peoples, and I think that there it becomes problematic. But let's, if I could just momentarily, I'll just read it. I won't post it on my screen. This is 1 Timothy chapter 1, starting at verse 3. And it says, now, keeping in mind the immediate context here has to do with Paul telling the disciple Timothy, who was going to, when he was going to, give me 1 second. I'm just pulling it up on my side. Yeah, he was giving him instructions on what he should do remaining at Ephesus. So anyway, so he says, as I urged you when I was going to Macedonia, remain at Ephesus so that you may charge certain persons not to teach any different doctrine, nor to devote themselves to myths and endless genealogies, which promote speculations rather than stewardship from God that is by faith, meaning faith in Jesus Christ. Verse 5, the aim of our charge is love that issues from a pure heart and a good conscience and a sincere faith. Certain persons, by swerving from these, have wandered away into vain discussion, desiring to be teachers of the law without understanding either what they are saying or the things about which they make confident assertions. It's interesting. While here Paul is admonishing these groups through Timothy, he's telling Timothy to tell those people to refrain from those things. During his time, I find it coincidental, so to speak, that we have the same thing going on these days, albeit with people who have radically different views than perhaps the people that were being admonished back then. And it's based on some of the same controversies. And I think that there it's important to note these sort of approaches, I think, gender to the kind of things that Paul himself is rebuking and telling others to abstain from. So I think on that note, I hope that people understand that this live stream was done to have a honest critique of, I think, the flawed methodologies of certain proponents of Hebrew Israelism. And of course, this isn't an accusation against all Hebrew Israelites. I don't want anyone to take it as that, but more specifically, just a critique in terms of how are people gleaning, the topic of DNA if they're going to make an appeal to DNA. We can always have an academic discussion. It doesn't have to be based on anything theological. I'm not accusing these men of necessarily making it salvific in nature, especially not Divine Prospect, but at least the other three men, I think in their case, it starts to become questionable, especially when allegations of threats of litigation and allegations of hate crimes are being leveled at us. That's unnecessary.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I appreciate you, my friend Abu, as always, for coming on through.
And you'll be uploading some videos soon, possibly, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's more to come then.
The Jed Match videos and several other goodies in the mix. So With that being said, I think I'm gonna end it here. I appreciate you for coming on through.
Everybody have a great day, and God bless.
Yep. God bless you all. I hope this has edified someone out there. And until next time, take care. God bless you.